What if the person you loved most in this world wasn't just your family, but literally the other half of your soul? What if nature made a mistake and split one person into two bodies, condemning them to seek wholeness in the most forbidden way possible? Deep in the Appalachian Mountains, where the mist never fully lifts and the hollows hold secrets darker than the coal buried beneath them, there live twins who would challenge everything we believe about the boundaries of human connection. Before we dive into the story, if you're fascinated by dark family secrets and tales that push the boundaries of human nature, click the like button and subscribe to the channel. Tell us in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there. Are you ready to discover why some bloodlines should never continue? Now let's continue with the story. Cedar Hollow, Kentucky, 1931. The most isolated valley in all the Appalachian Mountains, where the road ended 10 miles before you reached the first cabin, and where the morning fog was so thick it swallowed sound itself. It was here, in a small log cabin built by hands that had long since returned to dust, that Agnes Whitaker screamed her last breath into the world as she brought forth something that should have been impossible: twins. But not just any twins. The midwife, Hattie Coleman, who had delivered hundreds of babies in her 60 years, dropped her instruments when she saw them. A boy and a girl, yet identical in every way that mattered. The same sharp nose, the same wheat-colored hair, the same gray eyes that seemed to look through you rather than at you. Even the birthmark, a small crescent moon on the left shoulder, appeared on both children in exactly the same place. "Devil's mirrors," Hattie whispered, her hands shaking as she cleaned the infants. "I seen twins before, but never none like this. They ain't supposed to look the same when they's different sexes." "It ain't natural." Thomas Whitaker, a coal miner whose hands were permanently stained black, despite all the scrubbing, held his wife's cooling hand and stared at the babies who had cost him everything. Agnes had been bleeding for too long, her life pooling beneath her faster than anyone could stop it. Her last words were barely a whisper. "Keep them together, Thomas. They's one soul. Promise me." He named them Eliza and Elijah, biblical names for mountain children. From the first moment, they were unsettling. When Hattie tried to place them in separate baskets, both babies screamed until their faces turned purple, their cries so perfectly synchronized it sounded like one voice echoing. They only calmed when their tiny hands found each other. As the weeks passed, Thomas noticed things that made his skin crawl. When Eliza was hungry, Elijah's stomach would growl. When a mosquito bit Elijah's arm, Eliza would scratch the same spot on her own skin. They breathed in unison, blinked at the same moment, and turned their heads as if controlled by the same invisible string. The neighbors in Cedar Hollow began to whisper. Some remembered Thomas's grandmother, who had spoken in hushed tones about twins in their bloodline who were too close. Others simply crossed themselves when they saw the babies, their matching gray eyes tracking movement with an intelligence that seemed far beyond their months. By winter, Thomas had grown thin with worry and sleeplessness, watching his children, who seemed less like two people and more like one consciousness, experiencing itself in duplicate. The years in Cedar Hollow passed like water through cupped hands, and with each season, Thomas Whitaker watched his children become something that defied explanation. By the time Eliza and Elijah turned 6, they had developed a language that belonged only to them. Not gibberish like other children might invent, but a complex system of sounds that flowed between them like water finding its level. The local schoolhouse sat 5 miles down the mountain, a one-room building where Miss Catherine Donnelly taught all 8 grades together. Thomas had hoped that school might separate the twins, might give them each their own identity. He was wrong. On their first day, Miss Donnelly seated them on opposite sides of the room. Within an hour, she found them sitting together, though neither child remembered moving. "How did you get here?" she asked Elijah, who had somehow crossed the room without anyone noticing. "I was always here," both twins answered in perfect unison, their gray eyes unblinking. The incident that ended their formal education came 3 weeks later. Miss Donnelly had assigned an essay about what each student wanted to be when they grew up. She watched carefully as the twins wrote at their separate desks, ensuring they couldn't see each other's papers. When she collected their work, her hands trembled. Not only were the essays identical, word for word, but the handwriting was exactly the same, down to the way they crossed their T's and dotted their I's. "This ain't possible," she told Thomas that evening, showing him the papers. "They couldn't have cheated. I watched them every second. It's like they got the same mind." After that, the twins were educated at home, though Thomas could barely read himself. They taught each other, somehow knowing things neither had learned. Elijah understood arithmetic after Eliza studied it alone. Eliza could recite Bible verses that only Elijah had read. It was during their 10th winter that Thomas made a desperate decision. The twins had taken to sleeping in the same bed, curled together like puppies, breathing in perfect rhythm. When he tried to separate them, they would somehow end up together by morning, no matter how many locks he put on their doors. His drinking had gotten worse, trying to drown out the unnaturalness of his own children. He married Constance Murphy, a widow from the next hollow, who had 3 children of her own. She was a practical woman who had buried one husband already and knew how to manage a household. Thomas hoped she might bring normalcy to his home, might teach the twins how to be separate people. Constance lasted 6 months. The breaking point came on a moonless night in August. She woke to use the outhouse and heard voices from the twins' room. Peeking through the door crack, she saw them sitting in complete darkness, holding hands across the gap between their beds. They were speaking in unison, but not in English or their made-up language. It was something older, something that made her teeth ache to hear. "The moon knows our names," they said together. "The mountain remembers when we were one. Mother's blood sealed the splitting. Father's fear feeds the separation." Constance packed her things that very night. Before leaving, she grabbed Thomas by his whiskey-stained shirt. "Those ain't children, Thomas. They something else wearing children's faces. I seen animals birthed wrong that lived longer than they should. That's what you got there. Something that shouldn't be but is anyway." Thomas found the twins the next morning, sitting at the kitchen table, a breakfast already made, though neither could remember cooking it. They looked at him with those matching gray eyes and spoke as one voice. "She was never meant to stay, Father. We are complete in ourselves." The summer of 1945 arrived in Cedar Hollow with a heat that made the air shimmer like water. Eliza and Elijah, now 14, had grown into mirror images of each other despite their different sexes. Both had the same angular face, the same storm gray eyes, the same way of tilting their head when listening. Neighbors who glimpsed them through the trees often couldn't tell which twin they were seeing. It started with a morning in July. Eliza woke to find blood on her nightgown, the arrival of her first monthly bleeding. At the exact moment she discovered it, Elijah in the next room began bleeding from his nose, a 22 flow so heavy that it soaked through 3 of Thomas's work shirts. The blood wouldn't stop until Eliza's cramping eased, and when it finally did, Elijah's face was pale as limestone. "What's happening to us?" Eliza asked, though she already knew this was just another thread in the pattern of their intertwined existence. The fever came 2 weeks later. It started with Elijah, who collapsed while drawing water from the well. His temperature soared so high that Thomas could feel the heat radiating from his skin without touching him. Within minutes, Eliza fell ill too, her body matching his temperature degree for degree. Thomas faced an impossible choice. The nearest doctor lived in the town beyond the mountain, and taking both twins would be difficult. In desperation, he decided to take only Elijah, thinking that if one twin recovered, perhaps the other would too. He loaded his son onto the wagon, leaving Eliza in her bed. They hadn't gone a mile before Elijah began convulsing. His eyes rolled back, showing only whites, and foam tinged with blood appeared at his mouth. Thomas turned the wagon around, whipping the old mule until it ran faster than it had in years. He found Eliza in the same state, her body rigid with seizure. The moment Thomas carried Elijah back into the house and laid him next to his sister, both twins relaxed. Their breathing synchronized, their fevers broke simultaneously, and they opened their eyes at exactly the same moment. "We cannot be separated," they said in unison, their voices carrying a certainty that chilled Thomas despite the summer heat. Dr. William Marsh arrived 3 days later, having heard about the strange illness from a traveling merchant. He was a young man from Charleston, educated in modern medicine and skeptical of mountain superstitions. That skepticism died within an hour of examining the twins. "This is impossible," he muttered, checking his instruments for the third time. "Their heartbeats are perfectly synchronized. When I check one's pulse, I can feel it in the other. When I look in Eliza's throat, Elijah opens his mouth without being asked." He performed test after test. A pinprick on Elijah's finger made Eliza flinch. When he asked Eliza to close her eyes and touch her nose, Elijah performed the same movement without instruction. Most disturbing of all, when he used his stethoscope, he could hear both heartbeats through either chest, as if their hearts were echoing each other across the space between their bodies. "In all my studies," Dr. Marsh told Thomas privately, "I've never encountered anything like this. It's as if they share a nervous system, despite being in separate bodies. I would recommend they be studied at a proper medical facility, but I fear what might happen if you tried to take them from this place." The doctor left behind a journal, asking Thomas to record any unusual incidents. That journal would later become evidence of something that medical science still couldn't explain. Thomas wrote with his coal-stained hands, documenting how the twins would sometimes speak in languages neither had learned, how they would stand at windows looking at things no one else could see, how animals avoided them and milk curdled if they stared at it too long. The fever had changed them. They no longer pretended to be separate people, no longer made any effort to act like normal siblings. They moved through the cabin like two halves of the same organism. Thomas Whitaker had become a man haunted by his own children. The bottle that had once been his occasional companion now never left his side. As Eliza and Elijah passed their 15th birthday, then their 16th, his desperation grew like black mold in the corners of his mind. He had to separate them. He had to break whatever unnatural bond held them together before it was too late. His first attempt came in the spring of 1947. The Harlan County coal mines were hiring young men, and Thomas saw an opportunity. He arranged for Elijah to board with a mining family 3 counties away, far enough that the twins couldn't find each other easily. The morning of departure, Elijah stood by the wagon, his gray eyes calm as still water. "This won't work, Father," both twins said in unison, though Eliza stood 20 feet away on the porch. "Get in the wagon, boy," Thomas growled, his breath sour with whiskey. Elijah obeyed. As the wagon rolled away, Eliza remained motionless on the porch, her face serene. Thomas felt a moment of hope. Perhaps the separation would be good for them. Perhaps they could finally become individuals. 3 days later, a telegram arrived. Elijah had collapsed in the mine shaft within hours of his first shift. The other miners found him convulsing, blood running from his ears. When they brought him to the surface, he was barely breathing. The mining family put him on the first wagon back to Cedar Hollow. Thomas found Eliza exactly where he'd left her, sitting on the porch, her skin gray as ash, her breathing shallow. She hadn't moved, hadn't eaten, hadn't spoken a word since Elijah left. The moment the wagon carrying her twin appeared on the mountain road, color returned to her cheeks. When Elijah stumbled from the wagon and collapsed beside her, both twins smiled. "We told you," they said together. The second attempt was crueler. Thomas contacted his sister Margaret in Virginia, a stern woman who ran a boarding house for young ladies. He told her about Eliza, though he left out the details about the twins' connection. Margaret agreed to take the girl, to teach her proper womanly skills and perhaps find her a husband. This time, Thomas was smarter. He waited until the twins were asleep, then carried Eliza to the wagon. He drove through the night, delivering her to Margaret's house before dawn. By the time Elijah woke, his sister was 200 miles away. The screaming started immediately. Elijah's cries were so profound, so filled with agony, that birds fled from the trees. He clawed at his own skin, leaving bloody furrows, and spoke in tongues that no human throat should have been able to produce. Thomas tried to restrain him, but the boy had the strength of madness. Meanwhile, in Virginia, Margaret watched in horror as her niece fell into what appeared to be a waking coma. Eliza's eyes remained open but unseeing. She didn't respond to any stimulus, didn't eat, didn't drink. Her body began to shut down as if her soul had simply vacated it. The telegram from Margaret arrived on the third day. "Come get your daughter before she dies." The reunion was both terrible and beautiful. The moment Eliza was carried back into the cabin, both twins began to weep, their tears falling in perfect synchronization. They held each other with a desperation that made Thomas look away, understanding finally that he was fighting something beyond his comprehension. The final attempt to separate them came from Reverend Mills, a traveling preacher who specialized in driving out demons. He arrived in Cedar Hollow in the autumn of 1948, his black coat dusty from the road and his Bible worn from use. "I've heard about your children," he told Thomas. "This is the devil's work, mark my words. But the Lord is stronger than any demon." The exorcism took place in the cabin's main room. Reverend Mills commanded the twins to kneel on opposite sides of the room, sprinkling holy water and reading from Scripture. At first, nothing happened. Then, as his voice rose in fervor, calling on the demons to reveal themselves, something changed in the air. The temperature dropped so suddenly that breath became visible. The twins turned their heads in perfect unison to stare at the preacher, and when they smiled, it was the same expression on two faces. The thunderstorm that took Thomas Whitaker came without warning on a September night in 1948. Lightning split the sky like God's own fury, and the rain fell so hard it turned the mountain paths into rivers. They found him at the bottom of Devil's Drop, a cliff edge known for claiming lives of the careless and the drunk. His neck was broken clean, his eyes still open to the weeping sky. Eliza and Elijah stood at their father's funeral without tears. The handful of mountain folk who attended whispered about their unnatural calm, how they moved as one body with two shadows. When the preacher asked if anyone wanted to speak words over the deceased, the twins stepped forward together. "He tried to make us two, when we were always one," they said in perfect unison. "Now he is free, and so are we." After that day, the twins lived alone in the cabin at Cedar Hollow. They were 17, old enough by mountain standards to care for themselves. The nearest neighbors stopped visiting entirely, spooked by stories of lights in the windows at impossible hours and the sound of one voice speaking from two throats. The twins fell into a routine that required no discussion. They rose with the sun, tended their small garden, and maintained the cabin with an efficiency that came from perfect coordination. When Eliza's hands worked the butter churn, Elijah's prepared the molds. When Elijah split firewood, Eliza stacked it without being asked. They were a single mechanism operating in perfect harmony. It was in the spring of 1950 that Eliza first noticed the changes in her body. The morning sickness came like a thief, stealing her appetite and leaving her weak. Her breasts grew tender and full. Her monthly bleeding, which had always arrived as regularly as the moon's phases, stopped entirely. "This is not possible," she whispered to her reflection in the old mirror, her hands pressed against her still flat stomach. But Elijah knew better. He had felt it too, the strange fluttering in his own belly, the waves of nausea that matched hers exactly. When Eliza vomited into the wash basin, he tasted bile in his own throat. When her breasts ached, he felt phantom pain across his chest. No man had visited Cedar Hollow since their father's death. The only male Eliza had been near was her twin, her other half, the boy who shared her soul. The realization of what this meant crashed over them like ice water. But underneath the horror was something else, a terrible understanding that this too was part of their pattern. They searched the cabin with newfound purpose, pulling apart floorboards and examining every corner. In a metal box hidden beneath their parents' marriage bed, they found what they were looking for. Documents yellow with age, written in fading ink. A family tree that twisted back on itself like a snake eating its tail. Jeremiah and Josephine Whitaker, Eliza read aloud, her voice shaking. Born 1778. Mirror twins, wed to each other in secret ceremony. Bore twins Jesse and Judith, who also. The pattern repeated through generations. Mirror twins, who could not be separated, who eventually created more mirror twins, their grandmother and great-uncle, their great-great-grandparents. Back and back, the curse threading through their bloodline like a poisoned river. Eliza found another document, this one in their grandmother's careful script, the Gemini curse. It read, "When God makes a soul too large for one body, he splits it in two, but what is split seeks always to reunite. The children of such unions are marked, destined to repeat the pattern until the bloodline ends or the curse is broken. How do we break it?" Eliza asked, though her growing belly already held the answer. The curse would break when there were no more twins to continue it, when the line ended in death or separation so final that no reunion was possible. They sat together on the floor, surrounded by the evidence of their family's twisted history. Outside, the moon rose full and bright, casting shadows that made it impossible to tell where one twin ended and the other began. Eliza felt the quickening in Prache, her womb, the flutter of new life that should not exist. "They're moving," she whispered. The pregnancy progressed with a speed that defied nature. What should have taken 9 months compressed into 6, as if the babies growing inside Eliza were eager to enter the world, to continue the pattern that had been set generations before. Both twins felt every moment of it. When the babies kicked, Elijah would double over, his hands pressed to his own flat stomach. When Eliza's ankles swelled, his feet grew tender and sore. They began sharing dreams, vivid visions that came every night without fail. In these dreams, they saw themselves as infants, two halves of one whole, reaching for each other across the space between their baskets. They saw their parents, their grandparents, all the mirror twins stretching back through time, each pair locked in the same eternal dance of separation and reunion. It was during the 4th month that Granny Morrison appeared at their door. She was ancient beyond measure, her face a map of wrinkles, her eyes clouded with cataracts. No one knew exactly how old she was or where she lived. She simply appeared in the mountains when she was needed, carrying knowledge that most folks preferred not to think about. "I knew your grandmother," she said, settling herself by the fire without invitation. "Knew her brother too. Watched them fight the same fight you're fighting now. They thought they could resist it. Thought love between siblings was a sin that God would punish. But this ain't about God or sin. This is older than that." Eliza poured the old woman tea with shaking hands. Her belly was already round, too large for 4 months, and she could feel the restless movement within. "What is it then?" Elijah asked, his voice hoarse with the weight of unspoken fears. Granny Morrison's blind eyes seemed to see through them both. "Your family carries the Gemini curse. Started way back, when the mountains were young. A Cherokee medicine man fell in love with white settler woman. Their love was forbidden, so they asked the spirits to make them one person, thinking it would let them be together. The spirits got a sense of humor, see. They made them one soul, but kept them in 2 bodies. Every generation since, the soul splits again, trying to become whole. How do we stop it?" Eliza's hands moved instinctively to protect her belly. The old woman cackled, a sound like dry leaves. "Stop it? Child, you can't stop the sun from rising. This is what you are. 2 bodies sharing one soul. The babies you carry, they're the next split. They'll be like you, maybe more so. Each generation, the bond gets stronger, the separation gets harder." She reached into her bag and pulled out a jar of white salve. "For the birthing, rub this on your belly when the pains start. It'll help them come into the world easier. They're eager to be born, these 2. They know their purpose." After Granny Morrison left, the twins sat in silence, processing her words. That night, their shared dreams were more vivid than ever. They saw their children, a boy and girl with matching faces, growing faster than nature intended. They saw themselves aging rapidly, their life force flowing into the next generation. They saw the cycle continuing, inevitable as the tide. Elijah began preparing for the birth with the same certainty he brought to all their shared experiences. He gathered clean cloths, boiled water, prepared the bed. His body was rehearsing for a birth it would never directly experience, but would feel in every detail. "I'll be with you," he promised Eliza as her time grew near. "Every pain, every push. We'll bring them into the world together." Eliza nodded, her gray eyes meeting his identical ones. "They're ours," she said simply. "Both of ours. Made from one soul that should never have been split." The babies moved again, and both twins gasped at the sensation. Outside, the November wind howled through Cedar Hollow, carrying the scent of coming snow. Soon, very soon, the next generation of mirror twins would arrive, and the pattern that had haunted their bloodline for generations would begin anew. In her belly, Eliza could feel them reaching for each other already, practicing for a lifetime of being two when they should have been one. December brought the blizzard that old-timers would talk about for generations. Snow fell so thick and fast that it blocked out the sun, turning day into twilight. The wind screamed through Cedar Hollow, like the voices of all the ghosts that haunted the Whitaker bloodline. It was in this storm, cut off from any possible help, that Eliza's labor began. The first contraction hit both twins simultaneously. Eliza doubled over at the kitchen table, and Elijah collapsed beside the fireplace, their cries harmonizing into one sound of primal pain. As Granny Morrison had predicted, this would be a birth shared between two bodies, defying everything natural and holy. "It's time," they said together, their voices strained but certain. They had prepared for this moment, knowing no midwife would come, no doctor could help. The bed was ready with clean sheets boiled 3 times, water heated on the stove. The white salve Granny Morrison left sat within reach, but no preparation could ready them for what was to come. The contractions built like waves, each one stronger than the last. Elijah felt every tightening of muscles he didn't possess, every surge of pain in organs he'd never had. His body contorted in sympathy, sweat pouring down his face as he coached his sister through breathing they both needed. "I see them," Eliza gasped during a brief respite between pains. "In my mind, I see them reaching for each other." The labor progressed with unnatural speed. What should have taken hours compressed into minutes. The twins moved together in an ancient dance, Elijah supporting Eliza when she needed to stand, both of them knowing instinctively when to push, when to rest, when to breathe. As the first baby crowned, the strangest thing happened. The wind outside suddenly stopped. The howling that had been constant for hours ceased entirely, leaving a silence so complete it seemed the world itself was holding its breath. In that impossible quiet, the first twin was born. A girl, perfect in every way except for her eyes. They were gray like her parents, but they held an awareness no newborn should possess. She didn't cry. Instead, she turned her head, clearly searching for something, someone. "She needs her brother," Elijah said, his own body still racked with birthing pains. The second baby came quickly, as if he couldn't bear to be separated from his sister any longer than necessary. A boy, identical to his sister down to the small birthmark on their left shoulders. The moment he emerged, both babies reached for each other with a coordination that made the hair rise on both parents' necks. When the twins' tiny hands touched, they both smiled. Not the reflex smile of newborns, but something conscious, deliberate, relieved. The wind outside resumed its howling, but softer now, almost like a lullaby. "Thomas and Agnes," Eliza whispered, naming them for her parents. "They already know each other." Elijah cut the cords with shaking hands, noting how the baby's breathing was already synchronized. When he cleaned them and wrapped them in blankets, they fussed until they were placed side by side, their hands clasped between them. The afterbirth came with a final wave of shared pain, and then it was over. Eliza lay exhausted, her body already beginning the rapid aging that Granny Morrison had warned about. Elijah looked older too, lines appearing around his eyes that hadn't been there hours before. "Look at them," Eliza said, watching the newborns. They're more connected than we ever were. Each generation, the bond gets stronger. It was true. Where Eliza and Elijah had learned their connection over years, these babies were born knowing they were one. They moved in perfect mirror images, each gesture reflected instantly in the other. When Agnes yawned, Thomas yawned. When Thomas stretched his tiny fist, Agnes did the same. As the night wore on and the blizzard gradually weakened, the new parents took turns holding their impossible children. The babies would only settle if they could see each other, would only nurse if they were touching. Already the pattern was asserting itself. "We've continued it," Elijah said quietly, his voice heavy with the weight of their legacy. Eliza nodded, too tired to speak. In her arms, baby Agnes opened those knowing gray eyes and stared at her mother with an expression that seemed to say, "We understand, we accept, we are what we are meant to be." The cycle that had begun generations ago in these mountains had turned again. The years that followed the birth of Thomas and Agnes passed like pages torn from a book and scattered by the wind. Time moved differently in Cedar Hollow, especially for the Whitaker twins. As their children grew with impossible speed, Eliza and Elijah aged at twice the normal rate. By the time the babies were 1 year old, their parents looked as if a decade had passed. Thomas and Agnes were extraordinary from the start. They walked at 6 months, moving in perfect synchronization, like dancers following the same invisible choreography. They spoke their first words at 8 months, but it wasn't mama or dada that came from their lips. Instead, they looked at each other and said simultaneously, "We remember." The children grew so rapidly that clothes bought 1 month would be outgrown by the next. Their features, already identical at birth, became more pronounced, more beautiful, and more unsettling. Neighbors who occasionally glimpsed them through the trees reported seeing what looked like the same child in 2 places at once, moving through the forest with an otherworldly grace. Government men came in 1955, drawn by reports of peculiar mountain folk living in isolation. They arrived in black cars that struggled up the rutted mountain road, their clean-pressed suits out of place among the old growth trees and ancient stones. "We're here to check on the welfare of the children," the lead man said, his clipboard ready and his smile false as fool's gold. "We've had reports of unusual circumstances." But Cedar Hollow protected its own. As the men tried to approach the cabin, a fog rolled in so thick they couldn't see their hands in front of their faces. They wandered for hours, always finding themselves back at their cars no matter which direction they walked. The mountain itself seemed to twist and turn, paths appearing and disappearing, until finally they gave up and left, their reports filed as unable to locate. By 1959, Thomas and Agnes were physically teenagers, though only 9 years old by the calendar. They had their parents' gray eyes, but with an intensity that made grown folks look away. Their connection was absolute. They no longer needed to speak aloud to communicate, entire conversations passing between them in glances and gestures that their aging parents could barely follow. Eliza, now looking 70, though she was only 30, began keeping a journal. Her hands, gnarled with premature arthritis, struggled with the pen, but she was determined to document their story. "The children are us, but more," she wrote. "Where Elijah and I fought our connection for years, they embrace it. They are becoming something new, something that hasn't been seen before in our bloodline. I fear and marvel at what they might become." It was young Thomas who found the old documents that revealed the deeper truth. Hidden in the root cellar, wrapped in oilcloth, were papers that predated even the family Bible. Written in Cherokee and broken English, they told of the original curse, but with details that had been lost over generations. "It's not a curse," Thomas told his parents, his voice carrying authority beyond his years. "It's evolution. The medicine man didn't curse our bloodline. He started a transformation that takes generations to complete. Each pairing of twins brings us closer to what we're meant to become." "What are we meant to become?" Elijah asked, though part of him already knew. Agnes answered, her voice harmonizing with her brother's. "Complete, one consciousness in multiple bodies, the next step in human connection. We are the bridge between what humanity was and what it could be. The parents watched their children with a mixture of pride and terror. These beings they had created were moving beyond human understanding, beyond the simple curse they had believed in. They were witnessing the birth of something new. That night, Eliza wrote the final entry she would manage with her failing hands. They grow stronger as we grow weaker. Our life force feeds their transformation. This is as it should be. We were never meant to break the pattern. We were meant to complete it. May God forgive us for what we've done. May God help us for what's still to come. The photograph came a week later, taken by a traveling photographer who climbed the mountain on a dare. It would be the only evidence of their existence together. 4 figures standing in front of the cabin, 2 elderly, 2 young, but all with the same face viewed through different lenses of time. The image was so unsettling that the photographer destroyed most of the prints. The recognition of fate comes not as a lightning strike, but as a slow dawn, inevitable and impossible to deny. By 1962, Thomas and Agnes had grown into their destiny with the same certainty that water finds its way to the sea. At 13 by the calendar but appearing 18 in body, they moved through Cedar Hollow like matching shadows, 2 expressions of the same profound truth. Eliza watched her children with eyes that had seen too much. Her body, ravaged by the rapid aging that came with bearing twins of twins, could barely support itself. Elijah fared no better, his once strong frame bent and brittle. They were paying the price for continuing the bloodline, their life force steadily draining into their impossible children. "We have to tell them," Eliza whispered one morning, her voice papery as autumn leaves. "They need to know what's coming." But Thomas and Agnes already knew. They had always known. The knowledge lived in their bones, in the way their hearts beat in perfect rhythm, in the dreams they shared each night. Still, their parents gathered them in the main room of the cabin, the same room where so many twins before them had learned their fate. "Your children will be like you," Elijah began, his voice cracking with age and emotion. "But stronger, each generation, the connection deepens. We tried to fight it, your mother and I. We tried to be separate people. You must not make our mistake." Agnes reached across the space between her and Thomas, their fingers intertwining with practiced ease. "We could never be separate, Father. We understood from our first breath that we are one experiencing itself as 2. Our children will be one experiencing itself as 4, then 8, then 16. This is the pattern. This is the purpose." "But the cost," Eliza said, tears running down her weathered cheeks. "Look at us. We're dying, aging a year for every month that passes. You'll face the same when your time comes." Thomas smiled, an expression perfectly mirrored on Agnes's face. "Every transformation requires sacrifice, Mother. The caterpillar dies so the butterfly can emerge. You're not dying. You're completing your purpose, passing your essence to us so we can pass it forward." That night, the shared dreams were more vivid than ever. The young twins saw the full scope of their lineage, stretching back to that first Cherokee medicine man and forward into a future where the boundaries between individuals dissolved entirely. They saw a time when consciousness could flow freely between bodies, when humanity's isolation would end not through technology but through evolution. When Agnes experienced her first blood the following spring, Thomas bled from his nose just as Elijah had years before. But unlike their parents, they showed no fear, no confusion. They understood this was simply another marker on their journey, another sign that their bodies were preparing for what must come. The traveling photographer returned in autumn, drawn by stories of the strange family in Cedar Hollow. This time, he brought a new camera, one that could capture images in ways the old equipment couldn't. When he developed the photographs later, he discovered something that made him destroy his entire collection except for one image he kept locked away. In every photo, a strange doubling occurred. Thomas and Agnes appeared not as 2 people, but as one person somehow occupying 2 spaces simultaneously. The camera had captured what the eye couldn't quite see, the truth that they were a single consciousness split between 2 forms. "We need to prepare," Agnes told her parents that winter as the first snows began to fall. "Our children will come soon, and they'll need guidance we won't be able to give." The pattern is accelerating. Eliza and Elijah, now so aged they could barely leave their beds, listen to their children plan for a future they would never see. The twins spoke of building new rooms in the cabin, of storing supplies, of preparing for children who would grow even faster, age their parents even more quickly, push the boundaries of what it meant to be human even further. "Are we monsters?" Eliza asked one night, the question that had haunted her for years finally given voice. Agnes knelt beside her mother's bed, her gray eyes full of compassion. "No, Mother, we're chrysalides. Each generation brings us closer to emerging as something beautiful and terrible and necessary. You started a transformation that will change the public world." As 1963 dawned, the Whittaker twins prepared for the final phase. They could feel the pull of destiny, the weight of generations pressing down upon them. Soon, very soon, the next iteration would begin. The circle completed itself on their 32nd birthday, as it had been written in blood and bone since the first splitting of souls. Eliza and Elijah died as they had lived, in perfect synchronization. They drew their last breaths together, hands clasped between their beds, their faces peaceful as if they were merely sleeping. But death, like everything else in their lives, was not quite what it seemed. Thomas and Agnes found them at dawn, the mountain air crisp with the promise of spring. What they discovered defied explanation even for those who had lived with the impossible all their lives. Their parents' bodies had transformed in death, reverting to their 14-year-old selves, the age when their connection had first fully manifested. They looked like sleeping children, preserved in eternal youth. "The cycle resets," Thomas said, understanding flooding through him. They returned to the point of splitting, to become whole again in death. They buried their parents in the family cemetery, side by side in a single grave, as was the tradition for the mirror twins of their line. The headstone bore a simple inscription: "Split in birth, joined in death, eternal in purpose." That very night, Agnes felt the familiar quickening in her womb. The next generation had already begun. The following months passed in a blur of preparation and inevitability. Thomas and Agnes, now 13 and visibly aging with each passing day, set about documenting everything they knew. They filled journal after journal with the knowledge that had been passed down and the understanding they had gained. These would be the guides for the children who would come after, the ones who would push even further beyond the boundaries of individual consciousness. Local folk began reporting strange lights in Cedar Hollow at night. Not electric lights, but something organic, like foxfire grown large and purposeful. Some claimed to see multiple figures moving in perfect synchronization through the forest, though when they looked directly, only 2 teenagers were visible. The mountain itself seemed to pulse with an energy that made compasses spin and watches stop. Agnes gave birth on the winter solstice, the longest night of the year. As before, the labor was shared between the twins, but this time something new happened. The moment the first child crowned, every mirror in the cabin cracked. The windows fogged with frost that formed impossible patterns, and in the family cemetery, witnesses later swore they saw lights dancing above the graves of all the mirror twins who had come before. 2 sets of twins were born that night. First came Samuel and Sarah, then immediately after Matthew and Martha. 4 children, all identical despite the mix of genders, all reaching for each other the moment they entered the world. When the 4 newborns' hands met in the center of their circle, a sound rang through Cedar Hollow like a bell made of starlight. 4 who are one. Agnes gasped, already feeling the rapid drain of her life force. The pattern accelerates. The babies grew even faster than their parents had. By dawn, they looked weeks old. By the following nightfall, months. Thomas and Agnes aged in proportion, their youth bleeding away like water through cupped hands. But they felt no sadness, only completion. "Look at them," Thomas whispered, watching the 4 infants move in perfect harmony, their consciousness flowing between them like water finding its level. They don't just share thoughts. They are one thought experiencing itself in 4 forms. Days passed like years. The new twins developed at a rate that defied biology. They spoke in harmonies that human ears could barely process, their words layering meaning upon meaning. When they looked at something, they saw it from 4 angles simultaneously. When they learned, the knowledge instantaneously existed in all 4 minds. Thomas and Agnes, now ancient in appearance, though only days had passed since the birth, made their final preparations. They walked through the cabin one last time, touching the walls that had witnessed so many generations of impossible love and inevitable transformation. In the root cellar, they placed the final journal, the one that would explain to their children what even they were only beginning to understand. The medicine man was right, Agnes wrote with shaking hands. But he saw only the beginning. We are not cursed. We are evolving. Each generation doubles the connection. 2, 4, 8, 16. Eventually, all of humanity will be linked. The isolation that causes such pain, such cruelty, will end. We are the first notes of a song that will eventually include every voice. On the 7th day after the birth, as Thomas and Agnes felt their final moments approaching, their children spoke for the first time as a unified voice, not 4 voices in harmony, but one voice somehow emerging from 4 throats. We understand, parents. We accept. We continue. Thomas and Agnes smiled, their faces young again as the transformation of death began. They lay down together in the same bed where they had been conceived, where they had conceived their children, where generation after generation had passed the torch of evolution. We are one, they said together, their words echoing those of every mirror twin who had come before. As we have always been, as we will always be. Their children stood around the bed, 4 bodies moving as one, watching with eyes that held the wisdom of ages. As their parents drew their final breath, the babies spoke again. And we are many becoming one. The pattern continues. The pattern completes. The pattern begins again. In the years that followed, locals would report seeing lights in Cedar Hollow that couldn't be explained. Children who grew too fast, moved too perfectly, knew too much. Sometimes 2, sometimes 4, sometimes 8, but always with those same gray eyes, always with that same knowing smile. The transformation that had begun with the Cherokee medicine man's wish for unity continued its inexorable advance. Generation by generation, the mirror twins multiplied, their consciousness expanding, their connection deepening. What had started as 2 souls in 2 bodies was becoming something far greater, a network of consciousness that would eventually encompass all of humanity. In Cedar Hollow, where the mist never quite lifts and the mountains hold secrets older than memory, the pattern continues to this day. Locals know to avoid the old Whitaker cabin, where lights dance in windows that should be dark and voices speak in harmonies that make the soul ache with longing for a connection most people will never understand. But sometimes, on nights when the moon is dark and the wind is still, you can hear them singing, one voice from many throats, many voices becoming one. The sound of evolution in progress, of humanity's isolated islands of consciousness slowly merging into an ocean of shared experience, the curse that was never a curse. The blessing that comes with such a terrible price. The future being born in the body of the past, over and over again, until all boundaries dissolve and we become what we were always meant to be, one. If you made it this far, you've witnessed one of the most disturbing family secrets hidden in the Appalachian Mountains. A bloodline that challenges everything we believe about identity, consciousness, and the boundaries between self and other. Click the like button if this story left you questioning the nature of human connection. Subscribe to the channel to explore more dark truths lurking in America's forgotten places. Tomorrow, we dive into another tale that will make you question everything you thought you knew about family bonds. Comment below. Do you believe consciousness can truly be shared, or are we forever destined to be alone in our own minds? Your answer might be more important than you think.